This is Eric Rutan of Cannibal Corpse. You are listening to the Scars and Guitars podcast with Andrew McKay Smith.
G'day everybody, I've got a cracker of a conversation to share with you. This one features the Acolyte of the Foul Ones from a group called Altar of Gore, based in the United States. I'm working a lot with David from Earsplit PR, and we're going through some of the more subterranean groups, it's fair to say. Here's a very good example. I enjoyed this chat. It's another one that's off the wall, unstructured, just the way I like it, and I'll have a bit more to say about it in the outro. So if you're curious, stick around and I'll explain a few of my comments and some of the topics of conversation. I do have a tune to share with you from Altar of Gore. Who else? Okay, the album is out now. It's titled Litanies of the Unceasing Agonies, and the Acolyte, he picked this one, Carrion Womb. Once it's done, we'll dive straight into the chat, so let's go.
now you can see me.
Indeed,
Are you going to be Are you going to be recording video too, or is it mainly going to be audio?
I do things like this. I tend to have two different audiences. It's, you don't choose these things, with regards to music fans, but I've got a particular type of person who listens to me on YouTube, and then there's another audience for the podcast, so the Spotify and Apple and all the rest of it. And I tend to find if I release videos like this, ours, to YouTube, they get about 20 watches, whereas you can get thousands on the I call it the radio version, so the podcast version, and so ours is just going to be the podcast version. I tend to do that with all of the underground and the stuff, the cooler stuff. Put it that way.
All right.
The stuff I choose to do. Put it that way. A lot of the things that I get involved in are because I'm mates with the agents, and there's some fucking band coming through Australia, I don't know, In Flames or something like that, and you got to talk to the drummer or something. Nothing against them personally at all, but
right.
They're one of 17 drummers in the band at this point, and there's only so you want to support them, mate, but there's limits.
Yeah, of course, yeah. What's your impression of being in the band for the past 6 months on the road? What do you think?
I know. You can talk about, honestly, for a period of time there, I was doing exactly what Doug Stanhope said not to do, which is don't talk about airports and aeroplanes. And because what else have you got to talk about? They've come from nowhere. Usually a music, they're music teachers and this sort of thing, and they get drafted in and they're new to being on the road, and they're telling you about all the, smelling the other guy's farts constantly, and someone idiot starts cooking tuna in the van and all this stuff, and you're like, well, I guess that's what we've got to talk about. Otherwise, I journey with ayahuasca, and I start talking about that, and a lot of people just go blank. So I just go, well, I guess we've got nothing. So to be frank, mate, I'm way more selective. I'm way over 800 interviews at this point, and I like working with David because everything's fairly interesting. But mate, the bigger bands tell you fucking nothing. I mean, you're just going to get self-promotion, and they've got this version of this stupid fucking album coming out, and
right,
and I don't care. So it's far more interesting to talk to people like you about albums like Litanies of the Unceasing Agonies.
Oh, glad you think so.
And I'm a big Obituary fan. You may or may not have had this comparison before, but you're a far more gnarly version of what Obituary are doing these days. Have you heard that?
I actually have not heard that before. You're the first to compare me to them ever. And I'll admit, even though they are probably the most Celtic Frost sounding of the old school death metal bands, they were actually never one of the ones I got into as much.
Well, yeah. But did you, in terms of advancing your sound on Litanies of the Unceasing Agonies, I understand it's a bit of a jump from obscure and obscene gods. So did you have so when I say words like strategy or a system in mind, did you have a clear picture of what you wanted Litanies to sound like before you started?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I have a lot of bands, and the only way that I can keep them all straight is that each of them kind of has a pretty strict set of rules about what they are or not supposed to be. So in that sense, like I knew what I want Altar of Gore to sound like, so I did have an idea of where I wanted it to be, but a good friend of mine also warned me that, you should just do what you always do, but it's always going to wind up being a little different because you're a different person or you're in a different context when you're making it. So I think that is how I kind of I balance my expectations of what it could be, but also just kind of wound up being a little different anyway. And I think it's just maybe I relaxed my rules a little bit. I'm not exactly sure how to articulate it. It's always a little difficult for me to articulate stuff like that.
Yeah. Look, something else I noticed that the lyrics draw inspiration from epic fantasy series like the Mazalan Book of the Fallen and the Black Company. So how does literature influence you?
Well, those two books in particular are really inspirational for me, not just because I think they're good pieces of literature, but because both of them put a lot of work into world building. Now, I'm pretty sure at least the Malazan books came from a D&D campaign, so you can tell there obviously he was a huge nerd to start, and it definitely comes through. But it's kind of like Lord of the Rings, where it's not just this story. The story takes place in this world that has a history that goes back thousands of years. So that just depth appeals to me just because I'm also a huge nerd. But I also kind of admire anyone who goes to such outlandish lengths to do something creative like that. Like, nobody told him that he had to write this 10-book, almost 1,000 books a page series, but he went ahead and did it anyway. And I think that's awesome. So I think it's just the maniac world building and the maniac dedication to your own creativity, at least in one way. But also from what he did, there's all these, I can't get into too much detail. You could probably do a whole podcast just based on this series, but in it, there's a lot of different like deities, like, people that worship them. And a lot of them are kind of gruesome and grotesque. And a lot of the series is it's like very adult fantasy. So I also kind of like that idea of like, here's this kind of fantastical thing, but it's also violent as hell and kind of dark. And I don't know, that's the less cerebral side of it, I guess you could say.
Sounds awesome. I'm going to check it out.
Oh, you should. Oh man. If you do, the first book is a little bit slow, but if you can make it halfway through the second book, you're in for the whole thing. It's incredible.
Amazing.
Highly
Amazing
recommended.
stuff. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm just going from what the bio said. You're focusing on themes of flesh, blood, and bone. I'll get it out, rather than the occult and satanic worship that's really prevalent in the underground, and it's been done to death. Let's face it. So that was a conscious decision for you.
Yeah, I mean, the band kind of came to be in 2016, 2017, coming off the heels of caverncore death metal or whatever you want to call it, when everyone really liked incantation a lot. And we moved into what my friends and I somewhat derisively called triangle metal, which is, all the guys with the big, really long song titles with, the Enochian key, open the seventh gate to see Satan's wings or some weird shit like that. And that's cool if you're into that stuff. Like I think that stuff's interesting too. But when, your album, when you need a PhD to understand the lyrics to the record, I mean, that's just kind of, they lost me on that. And so me being, maybe a little contrarian, I thought, well, wouldn't it be interesting if you did something where instead of it being this sort of, spiritual blasphemy and lofty, open your third eye, devil worship kind of shit. What if it was all of the mysticism coming from the most profane, which is, the human realm, flesh, bone, and blood, like everything that's not sacred, and deriving like what is the mysticism of that, the profane thing as opposed to the sacred. And so that was kind of the why or where that came from, I guess you could say.
That's a realist take on things, and metal does become very boring when it relies on the tropes of Satan, broadly speaking. So that was something that you've evidently picked up on early on. So I take it that Merciful Fate and those sort of albums, even though there's an appreciation for them, the imagery and the lyrical side of it didn't influence you.
Oh, quite the contrary. I love all the satanic stuff just as much as anyone else. I came up on all that stuff, like most people who are into evil metal music. But for me, what's more important than sticking to one paradigm is just that it is appropriate to the project. And even though Altar of Gore is inspired by a lot of overtly satanic bands, to me, it doesn't really sound like satanic. I don't know. It's not really a blasphemous thing. So I don't think me writing about Satan and all that stuff would really be appropriate for the project overall.
So no keyboards either.
Well, there were keyboards on the very first demo, but I was like, no, that's too much. It doesn't need it. And yeah, but no keyboards. Not this time.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on the evolution of Gen 2 black metal? Have you thought about that in any detail?
Gen 2 black metal?
Yeah, so Emperor, that sort of thing, as opposed to Bavery and
Well, this is another funny thing. I say, no synths in Altar of Gore, which is definitely true, but I actually am not opposed to synths. I have a couple of them myself. They're all sitting behind me right now, but not really in the band like Altar of Gore. I honestly was just trying to come up with a nice, snappy little line for the promo text because I hate coming up with stuff like that. And you know what? I decided I was going to go for it and just be that metal band this time around. And that's where it came from.
You've probably noticed there's a proliferation of underground bands using ChatGPT to generate their descriptors and probably even their lyrics at this point. God only knows. But do you have a view on that?
I mean, at the end of the day, there's always going to be new tools that allow people to do stuff for better or for worse. And I remember seeing somebody say somewhere, it's just another choice that people can make. And it's another choice that you can disagree with. I personally, I don't really care, but if I see that, I might be a little bit less inclined to check it out. Not necessarily because I'm against AI, but it just kind of, to me, suggests a certain, I don't want to call it laziness per se, but I invest a lot of my own time and energy into everything I do because I care about it. I do this stuff because it makes me happy. It satisfies me, and because I just want to do it. And like, I don't understand why in what could be such a highly personal enterprise for somebody, why you would surrender something like that to a computer. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me.
It's adjective based as well. Yeah, it's pathetic a lot of the time.
Yeah, I mean, it usually doesn't really look that good. And, I think if you spend enough time around, it becomes quite clear what is and what isn't. And, I mean, again, like, people are going to do what they're going to do. I generally try to recognize the fact that I can be, Grandpa Simpson yelling at the cloud all day, but people who grew up with the new stuff that's available now, they don't give a shit. Just like I didn't give a shit what the older people did when I was growing up. I'm sure they said, I downloaded music when I was a kid, but everyone else, no, you gotta own it. And, I do own plenty of CDs and records now, but hearing everybody say, oh, this is how we did it back in the day. This is how you should do it. That never swayed me when I was a kid. So I don't really understand why people would think it would sway anybody now. I personally think it's lazy, but people are going to do what they're going to do. So people want to make use of that tool, let them, but it's probably not going to be as good.
You raised a few good points there. The one I want to talk about for a moment is the proliferation of downloading that happened in the late 90s through Napster, and then onto LimeWire and BitTorrenting and all the rest of it. I mean, if that didn't happen, metal wouldn't have evolved. It wouldn't have had its third and fourth wind, if you like, because it's a grassroots thing. And I remember downloading the Iron Maiden albums after only owning one or two of them at the time, because I was poor. I didn't have any money when I was growing up. I only had the one Metallica or two Metallica albums, the two Megadeth albums, even though I wanted them all. You just couldn't get it. When it opened up, suddenly you had access to this universe and you were already invested. So it meant that you could go all in. Do you share that view?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I started high school in the early 2000s, so that was right in that formative period for me. And shit, when I first moved to New Jersey, I had no friends for a whole summer. It's the same time I discovered Metal Archives and Soulseek. So pretty much the only reason why I'm into any of this stuff and why I do any of this is because of downloading. So I completely agree with you. There was a time where kind of like before you could watch anything on YouTube, you could, like, as we know, you could buy the CD or not. And, who knows all the stuff that was so important to me. I mean, that was so important to me that shaped everything about what I do. I might not have discovered if I had to, track it down somewhere and buy it. I mean, shit, I downloaded Morbid Tales for the first time I heard it, and that completely blew apart my entire brain. So I'll never fault it. I own plenty of CDs and records still, but I'm definitely with you.
Yeah. It's a debate that I think it's one of those people reframing things from the perspective of now. When you look back in history, it happens in politics, it happens right across all spectrum of humanity. But it's that thing where people these days talk about how bad downloading is, and nowadays it's people are saying how bad streaming is, and we'll see in the fullness of time how that actually does play out. But it's being blamed, certainly in Australia, on the closure of venues. Can you believe it's being? And from my perspective, okay, the last time I think I went to the Mr. Bungle show and some fuckwit vomited next to me. That's why I'm not going. Yeah, that's why I'm not going to gigs. I don't drink anymore. I've got to get the kids up for school the next day. I'm still, as you can tell,
Right.
invested. The last thing I want to do
Right.
is stand next to some fucking moron with long hair who vomits on himself because he's preloaded before going out because he's too poor to buy the $17 beers that are there. I understand it, but that's the deal. I mean, his problem isn't mine, if you understand what I'm saying. So, people, this very long boat. It's all these. Usually, there's left wing fucking outlets like the Rolling Stone and all the bullshit that carry on with it. And it's like at some point in time, there's just got to be some responsibility for creating a better environment to put gigs on in. Is that something that you've given any thought to?
I mean, I personally don't go to that many shows just because most of the time, I mean, I've been a performing musician since I was a kid. So I just kind of have a different relationship to it, I guess. So, I mean, that was never really my thing to go. I mean, as to why people are going to shows less or making a more comfortable environment, I mean, to some extent, yeah. I mean, I also think that it's just, different people place different value on things. And I think that, plenty of people still go to concerts. And I think, for a venue that closed to say, oh, it's because of streaming, it could just as likely be because they were a shitty venue, that serves people too much beer to the point where they're getting drunk and puking on your shoes. I don't know. It's tough to say. I mean, I feel like every situation's a little bit different. But at the end of the day, if I had to choose between listening to a record by myself in my room and going to see it performed live, I'd probably pick the record. But that's just for myself.
I'm getting to that point. I'm with you on that. I've been to a ton of shows, and I'm getting to a point now where we've got a venue called Brightside here in the Valley, and once it gets over, I would say 3/4 capacity, you can't see the band because it's got nothing to do with COVID. I just don't like people standing on me. Okay,
Right.
It's just I'm old. I'm 46 these days. I don't care anymore. I'm done. I've done my time in mosh pits and I had long hair and all the bullshit, and I'm not doing it. And it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous for a full-grown man to be looking like that these days, and to be next to people who smell of vomit and weed and God knows whatever else they've imbibed before they've come in. And we've got to somehow. I guess I'm ruminating now out loud what we can do here in Australia, but I suppose there's got to be some elements of what I'm talking about in the United States and in Europe, because most of the people who listen come from those two parts of the world. And boutique venues, I really would love to see the rise of boutique venues and bands like Altar of Gore, man. I mean, it's for you, 20 and 30 people in there, $15 cover charge or something like that. If you want to drink, the beers are back down to regular prices, $7 or $8. You clean up in terms of getting. Maybe you get paid $1,000 for the gig. You understand where I'm headed, like local venues doing it that way. And instead of, and put it on a Tuesday or a Wednesday night, people might actually come out and do it at a rational time where everybody's home in bed by midnight, rather than 2 and 3 in the morning after battling through the public transport system in your area. I hope there's some reimagining and some rethinking and on that front, because bands, I'd love to see you in that environment.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of played something similar to that earlier this year when Witch Vomit came through on a tour they were doing of the East Coast, and they wound up playing at our practice space, which is also kind of a small venue in an industrial part of kind of a random small city in New Jersey, and we had maybe 40 or 50 people there. There's no bar there because it's basically in a warehouse, so BYOB, but everyone was just kind of having a pretty moderate time. There were a lot of altar heads there too. Well, so aside from nowhere to sit, I mean, it may have been a similar experience to what you're saying. But, I think for what you're talking about, a lot of it depends on where you are too. I mean, if you're in New York City, for example, it's very common for anything to go really late. So if that's just, where you are and that's just what people do, you're a little bit more used to it, I guess. I personally, I'm only going to shows for the most part to play them. So for me, if I have to be there really late or deal with it, that's just part of the experience for me. But I understand it's not comfortable. Not my first choice either.
I was looking at my analytics on YouTube the other day because I don't really get them I've changed to Podbean for the podcast host. So I only really get the analytics on YouTube, and the average age of my listener is like 41 or something like that. So what I'm saying is we're not young, but we're not older. We're approaching middle age. Right. And I would imagine that's similar for you when you're looking out, because I know you've done a fair few gigs from the looks of the things that are posted on YouTube. Do you see that reflected in your audience as well?
I would say that every gig I've ever played has been a really interesting mix of people. I can't say that there's ever really been a time where I was like, wow, this is all kids, except maybe when I played a basement show, which is a little bit more DIY, a little more punks. So that was definitely a little bit younger. But most of the gigs I play, you see a pretty decent range of people there. And I think that speaks a lot to the fact that metal appeals to a lot of different people for a lot of different reasons. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I could say it's mostly older folks from what I see, but yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah. Hey, just talking about the artwork on Litanies of the Unceasing Agonies, okay? I like it a lot. I love that sort of underground stuff. My daughter does too. She's only 10, but I'll show her the artwork. And she's got quite a bit of it from flyers and things that I get sent and stickers and stuff. But you worked with an artist who I haven't heard of before called Taylor Smith. So what can you tell me about your collaboration with him?
So Taylor's a good friend of mine. I actually first met him in the record store that I still work at. He was just there visiting, and we were both wearing death metal shirts, and we got to talking as you do. And when he mentioned he was an artist, I looked him up and holy shit, like this is absolutely perfect for Altar of Gore. Everything about his style, just the absurd, over the top blood dripping, and just the really over the top violent imagery, and it's like a little bit cartoonish, but it's not really cartoonish. Like everything about it just seemed perfect. And as I mentioned before, I'm a big stickler for everything kind of making sense for the band and for the project. And as soon as I saw his style, I was like, that's it. That's for Altar of Gore. And I asked him if he would do the first album, and he did. And I guess according to him, it actually got him a pretty good amount of recognition, which I'm really happy about because he's really talented and that's how he makes his living. So I want to support it as much as I can. So I was very pleased when he agreed to do the second one. And I think the piece he did for the album is the best thing he's ever done.
What are your thoughts on the artwork associated with brutal death metal being as important to the artifact as the music itself?
I think it's very important just because, it might be a little bit, I don't want to say less vital now in the day where you can just listen to something on YouTube or whatever, but the artwork forms your first impression of the band. And I think that especially now that metal is approaching, 40, 50 years old, like we have enough stylistic conventions in the different genres where, certain styles are more associated with certain kinds of music. And that, sets up your expectations, kind of gives you an idea of what you're looking at. And I think that also for me as someone who also does this stuff creatively, like I also look at any release as it's the series of the product of a series of choices that you make as a musician or as an artist, whatever you want to call it. And then to me, there are some decisions where if you make a bad decision, for me personally, it kind of calls everything else into question. And I'd say that bad art is probably the first big grave sin that you can commit to me. Just, I think it's so important. It's the first thing you see. It's what represents it in a non-audio way. And like, if you don't take that seriously, I think it can be massively detrimental to what you try to do. So I definitely agree. It's really important. And, if you have bad art, even if the music's good, it definitely kind of takes it down a little bit for me personally.
Do you do well with the merch sales?
Generally, yeah. I mean, when we play shows, we don't play that many shows between all of our different bands. So I think typically when we do and we have merch, people will buy it because it's one of the only chances they get to do it in person. But I'm actually thinking about doing some merch with the new album soon. So I guess we'll see how that's what it's like now versus what it was like the last time I made shirts.
Yeah, cool. Have you sent many to Australia at all?
Not too many, but I think that has less to do with the lack of desire and more to do with just the expense of shipping at this point.
Oh yeah.
It's nuts. I mean, especially to Australia from the US, I think it might be the most expensive going there. And I try to make things as cheap as possible and try not to pass on those costs to people, but after a certain point, if you're paying like $40 to ship a $20 t-shirt, it's just kind of a shit situation, unfortunately.
You're not wrong about us being far away from the world or the implications of that. I wrote a book 2 years ago or thereabouts, and I had to send quite a few to Europe. Your part of the world tour. It wasn't too bad to there, but Europe, and then it ended up being like $80 Australian. I just wore the cost to be honest, mate, because they're people who are invested and they cared, and I just thought, fuck it, they're good people, man. You can just whatever, and but $80 it was. I remember that, and I was like, well, I guess that's because the book was quite a tome. It was 400 pages or something like that. So it ended up being over the 300 or 400 gram threshold, and I was like, what do you do, mate? You got to pursue your art.
Exactly, and that's honestly why when people do order from all over the world, and it does happen, I've shipped stuff to like all over the place at this point. So when someone does, damn well I'm packing that thing really well because I really truly appreciate the dedication that people have to pay that. And I like to tell people as much as possible too. So please know I will ship to Australia if anybody wants to, but I understand it's really expensive.
Yeah, touring outside of the vicinity you're in at the moment. Have you thought about going abroad, Europe, Australia, that sort of thing?
We did have an opportunity to go back to Czechia, actually. I played drums live in another band called Siege Column. We're assigned to Nuclear War now. We flew out there last year for their fest, and this year they invited us to go back, but we unfortunately could not make it work with scheduling constraints. So I'd love to. Anybody wants to make it happen, please get at me. We'll love to do that in any way, shape, or form that we can.
Nuclear War now, that's the label headed by the Japanese-American fella, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, what's your relationship like with the label?
I don't personally have one. I'm only the live drummer in that band, so I've met him a bunch of times. He's a nice guy. But beyond that, I don't really have any kind of working relationship with them. But I did get to play his fest in Oakland a couple of years ago, which was fucking awesome. And then in Tijuana, Mexico 2 years ago now, which was also fucking incredible. Got to open up for Diocletian, Revenge, and Blasphemy on the same show, which is pretty fucking sick. Yeah.
We talk about being invested. He seems like he's all in. He's a good bloke that way. He really gives a shit.
Yes, definitely does.
Yeah, good on him. You need the true believers, mate, don't you?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Next steps and future plans. Have you thought that far ahead in terms of what comes next after Litanies?
Well, I have had some ideas of what to do, but I actually have a couple other things I'm trying to wrap up. So I probably won't go back to riffing seriously for Altar of Gore for a little while. But the other thing I've come to realize is that sometimes inspiration strikes when it strikes, and I just strive to capture it when I can. So who knows? I've debated maybe trying to do an EP just because I like short releases sometimes, and I've done one before. But if I keep writing songs and it just seems like there's another record, then I'll probably just go for another record.
Mate, fantastic chat. Really appreciate it. It's a lot of deep insight there, and enjoying Litanies, actually. If the album isn't out yet, though, so I can't... Is there one available on YouTube or thereabouts I can maybe share?
It actually, just as of the day that we were recording this interview, is streaming in its entirety now. So you can find it, I think, on No Clean Singing is the site that hosted it. So there's a full stream of it there. And the album actually is formally released on Friday, so you can stream it everywhere then.
Okay, sweet. Are you cool if I pick it, or actually I'll ask you to pick a track and I play it on the podcast version of our chat?
Yeah, you can play the song Carrion Womb, which opens the B-side. It's track 5, I guess, if the intro is track 1.
Wicked. Fantastic. Yeah. Well, fantastic chat. I love your music, mate. I can tell you're invested, and you're one of us in terms of the people that are listening, who love this sort of stuff. Just regular people who just love really extreme music. And I played a bunch of your stuff from memory on my music show, which I've been doing for about 4 or 5 years at this point. And I always make a point of playing a lot of the more extreme stuff that David sends through, and the Sentient Ruin stuff as well. And you featured in and amongst all of that. So there's worthy companions there. But thanks very much for the chat, brother. It's been a good one.
Likewise. Thank you for having me, and have a good rest of your day.
Well, what did you think? That was a frank conversation with the Acolyte of the Foul Ones from a group called Altar of Gore. Do check out that album. It's an absolute perler if you love your underground extreme shit. Litanies of the Unceasing Agonies, available everywhere right now. Came out on the 17th of May this year, 2024, if you're in the distant future. Now, just some comments that I mentioned throughout the chat, particularly up top. I just don't like doing a lot of the bigger band interviews these days because I get so many opportunities, which means that I have a chance to listen to how the interviews and the conversations are going with the person or the subject before accepting them. And in a lot of cases, they're just boring. And I'm so busy these days with family, work, music, the podcast, academic pursuits that I'm really just at a point where I want to have high quality conversations. So that's what this show is all about from here on. It always has been that way, but I'm almost 8 years into doing this. And the perspective that I bring to it is that if I can't have fun when I'm doing it, and if the person that I'm talking to isn't actually invested in having a conversation rather than doing an interview, I probably won't even release it after the fact. And it hasn't happened yet. There's been a few that I haven't put to air, but for different reasons, maybe bad audio quality or there's been some technical reason. But like that chat there, it was me actually sitting in the car at work because that's the only opportunity that I had to have that chat that week. But it's a good one. It's a good indication of where I'm going to continue taking the podcast, particularly for you, the podcast audience. And I do appreciate you. I've got to say the YouTube people are a bit different. They comment and do all their thing, but you people on the podcast apps, you listen, send me a message from time to time, and you're generally far more like me than what I suspect, and I'm just going by anecdotal audience here, that the YouTube audience is. You tend to follow the show as opposed to listen to the person or have searched the person, whoever it might be, in YouTube and stumbled across my interview by chance. You people out there in podcast land tend to be invested in Scars and Guitars, and for that I am very appreciative. So, all right, that's enough from me. As you already know, likely, my name's Andrew Mackay Smith, and I'm the host of Scars and Guitars. Until the next one, it's a goodbye for now.